Hi, I'm Owen Canfield with the Oklahoman, joined today by Chris Castile, our Washington correspondent. We're talking on Friday, November 6th, and earlier today, President Barack Obama agreed with his State Department, which came down against the northern leg of the Keystone Pipeline. So, Chris, we'd like to talk about that. We thank you for joining us today, by the way.
Glad to do it, Owen. Good to see you.
You know, not at all surprising, I don't think, to anyone who's followed any kind of attention to this. I think for folks in Oklahoma, the energy industry, of course, it's a disappointing decision, but not at all surprising. Would you agree?
Absolutely. You know, I mean, I think it's been heading this way. If they, you know, especially as we get closer to the presidential election, and Hillary Clinton has already said she's against it. Of course, Bernie Sanders is against it. So it'd be really tough to see Democratic president coming out for this. A lot of people thought he'd probably just punt it into the next administration, but this kind of, you know, maybe it takes it off the table, but probably not. You know, I think it just stays kind of the same as far as the political debate goes. You know, Republicans will continue, you know, to attack the administration for, you know, not allowing this job creation in the building of the pipeline, and you know, they will say that it contributes to the nation's energy security, and that the administration is just, you know, kowtowing to environmental extremists, which is what they have said.
Right. Well, it seems to me to be something of a legacy builder as well. He can leave the Oval Office a year from now or so and say, well, when I had the opportunity, I said no to this plan, and I think that's important to him. So,
yeah, I don't disagree with that at all.
A couple things the president said, in summary, really, is a few things he pointed out. In his contention, the pipeline wouldn't have much of an impact at all on really driving up numbers of jobs. He also said it wouldn't lower gas prices for consumers, and that it wouldn't do anything to increase this country's energy security. I think those are sort of the three main points he tried to make today. You mentioned as we got ready to go on air that the Secretary of State said some of the same things in his response as well.
Yeah. I mean, you know, I think they both men made the same basic point today, that this, and let me just say how Kerry came out and said it. The reality is that this decision could not be made solely on the numbers. The United States cannot ask other nations to make tough choices to address climate change if we are unwilling to make them ourselves. I mean, basically right there, he's all but saying this was a symbolic decision. You know, they're getting ready to go to this big climate change meeting, you know, within the next few weeks, and they can't go there with, you know, the idea that they might also approve, you know, a tar sands pipelines. I mean, it was just for the last few years. You know, there's this application, the first, you know, application for the permit, I think, was made 7 years ago. And for the last few years, it has just been, as you know, the president pointed out today, it has really had kind of an out of proportion role in this nation's political discourse. It's exaggerated, its impact is exaggerated on both sides.
Right.
And had it not been really for this kind of unwavering and outspoken opposition from environmental groups, you know, in Nebraska, first in Nebraska, really about the route that it was going to take through Nebraska, and then about the greenhouse gas part of it, you know, this thing would have been approved. There's 70 oil and gas pipelines across the U.S.-Canadian border.
Well, you beat me to the next point I was going to make, Chris, and that is the folks who say, wait a minute, why would you say no to this one when this country is already traversed by scores of pipelines, including some that come across from Canada. Right. What makes this one so different? And the answer is
because it took on this symbolic importance.
Right.
You know, it became, you know, the keystone. You know, it just became this symbolic thing that, you know, as even the president conceded, out of proportion to its importance.
Right.
You know, whether it's importance in talking about jobs and a huge economy that we have. Or talking about gas prices on a world market, or talking about greenhouse gas emissions. It has a tiny role in a discussion of any of those things.
Right.
So it's just, you know, and like I said, I mean, I don't think we've heard the last of this.
Well,
we'll hear about it. We'll hear about it in the debate next week, the Republican debate next week, for sure.
Sure. Well, one thing that's interesting is that, you know, the State Department had previously said, the president today said, kind of alluded to the fact that, as he called it, shipping dirtier crude oil into our country,
Right.
blah, blah, blah. You know, sort of those catchwords that appeal to his base, et cetera. What others would say, the opposing side would say is, wait a minute, your own State Department previously said that if we were to build this thing, it wouldn't, there's the risk of damage to the, to the environment is really minimal.
Yeah,
it's minimal.
It's
and so it really seems to be more of a not so much as you said earlier, a symbolic. It's more of a symbolic move than anything else, because the data shows that if the pipeline had been built, it wouldn't have been it wouldn't have been the end of time as we know it, ecologically.
Right, but it became this tug of war between the big constituencies of the two parties, right? Environmental groups and energy companies. But kind of the one anomaly you had in there was the unions that are normally obviously very strong Democratic constituency, but were for this pipeline.
You bet. Well, it would have meant, as it was getting built, it would have meant a bunch of good jobs during the time it was getting built. Sure.
Absolutely. I mean, even if some of them were just, for as long as it took to build the pipeline, those are still good jobs. Those are high-paying union jobs.
Well, and the other thing too, Chris, as you know, is the oil is going to get moved somehow. It's going to go to China. It's going to, and here in the United States, that means more going by rail, which has the potential to be more destructive, to the environment than if it had been in a pipeline. So
that could be true. But the other thing about this, and maybe the bottom line of this is that they could just resubmit an application.
That's right. Sure.
Yeah, I'm sure we haven't heard the end of this.
No.
And maybe they need to name it something else next time. Maybe this shouldn't be Keystone XL. They just need to come up with, how much branding, how important branding is.
Right.
But we should also point out before we go that, this is a two-part project. And half of that actually was built, the southern leg from Cushing, Oklahoma, which is kind of a pipeline hub.
Right.
To the Gulf Coast.
Correct.
And that did relieve a lot of pressure, on oil that had been kind of building up in Cushing. So this was I think about a 1,200-mile segment from Alberta to Nebraska, and it would have allowed also for some of Harold Hamm's oil to have been piped from North Dakota to Nebraska as well. I could have picked up some of that on the way, but I don't know how he feels today because I haven't gotten a statement from him. But Harold Hamm, the head of Continental Oil in Oklahoma City, basically called this pipeline irrelevant a few months ago.
That's right.
I think there's, maybe a little bit of sentiment among Oklahoma City, Oklahoma oil companies that are laying off people that maybe we don't need a lot more supply right now.
The bigger fix right now for Oklahoma and oil states would be potentially to lift that embargo that's been in place. That would do more right now than the pipeline.
I think that's actually absolutely right. Doing one without the other, say building Keystone without lifting that embargo on exporting domestic oil, that would just you basically asking to lay off a bunch more people in Oklahoma.
Chris Castile in Washington, D.C. Great to see you again, even via Skype, and we appreciate
you too, Owen.
Appreciate your work. You can read all of Chris's stuff every day in the Oklahoman.